Joe Rogan is a well-known American stand-up comedian and a host and producer of one of the most popular podcasts in the world, the Joe Rogan Experience. His net worth is currently around $100 million. In today's video, we'll tell you about how Joe made his money, his personal life, and of course, his big deal with Spotify. Sit back and enjoy. Joe was born in August 1967. He didn't really have the best of childhoods. Like most interesting success stories, Joe grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and was raised by an abusive father who was a police officer. His father would often smack everything and everyone at the slightest provocation. In an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience with Ari Shaffir, Joe described his father as crazy and psychotic. The violence got so bad that the couple decided to divorce when Joe was just 5 years old. 2 years later, he and his mother moved over to San Francisco to restart their lives. And guess what? He's not had any communication with his father since they moved. During an interview with Rolling Stone in October 2015, Joe said, "All I remember of my dad are these brief, violent flashes of domestic violence." In another instance, Joe had a fight with his cousin, and instead of comforting him or rebuking him from fighting, his father was more interested in whether he cried or not. His dad literally made him promise never to cry. In Joe's own words, "My father wanted me to be like him. One time I had a fight with my cousin because I like King Kong and he liked Godzilla. My dad pulled me aside, pulled me into a room, shut the door. I'll never forget this because I was 5 years old. There are very few things that I remember about him, but this is one of them." And he goes, "What happened?" And you could not lie to him. There's no lie. "You didn't cry, did you?" "No, I didn't cry. Don't ever cry." Then he patted me on the head and walked out of the room. I was punching everybody after that. I got the green light to punch kids as long as I didn't cry. This is really sad. What Joe saw from his father made him a lonely kid. He often found himself playing alone, or by himself. And although he had a good relationship with his stepfather after his mother remarried, they were hardly around due to their busy work schedules. Young Joe learned a lesson never to count on people. He developed trust issues and decided he was going to become someone that others could count on. It comes as a surprise that Joe struggled with being bullied as a kid. One would have expected him to be a bully himself. His struggle with being bullied led him to martial arts. Joe became very interested in martial arts like karate and taekwondo. He began practicing at the age of 13, becoming so good at it that he won several tournaments. To date, Joe still believes that this was the best decision of his life. In a 2014 interview with SB Nation, Joe could be quoted saying, "Martial arts gave me not just confidence, but also a different perspective of myself and what I was capable of. I knew that I could do something I was terrified of, and that was really difficult, and that I could excel at it. It was a big deal for me." He eventually enrolled at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, but dropped out before graduating for a lack of interest. Funnily enough, Joe's transition into comedy actually came from his time in martial arts. Traveling and waiting at the backstage at fighting tournaments was extremely nerve-wracking for Joe and his friends. To lighten up the mood, Joe would make jokes. His friends considered his jokes funny, and they were the ones to encourage him to try stand-up comedy. He listened to his friends and decided to get his hands dirty. Joe's first performance as a stand-up comedian was at an open mic session. After that, he continued to perform at similar events and somehow grew his reputation as a funny entertainer. His jokes were crude, and this helped him get bookings for bachelorette parties. But then, it was just about survival at this point. Joe took a couple of jobs to pay the bills. He taught martial arts at Boston University, ran a newspaper delivery route, and even put in hours as a construction worker. By 1990, and now 23, Joe had become a full-time comedian. He managed to make an appearance on national television in 1994 on NTC's half-hour comedy hour. Soon after, he started accepting acting gigs and worked as a post-fight interviewer for Ultimate Fighting Championship shows. I'll be honest, I got to know about Joe from one of my favorite shows, Fear Factor on NBC. Between 2001 and 2006, and then again from 2011 to 2012, Joe hosted 7 seasons of the popular Dare Show. In the first 6 seasons, Fear Factor averaged around 11.5 million viewers. You could see that the popularity of Joe increased with this. In addition to acting and comedy, Joe has been able to monetize his podcast called the Joe Rogan Experience. The podcast was launched in 2009, but before I talk about that, in 2010, Aubrey Marcus and Joe worked together in developing a supplements brand. Both men had a prior working relationship when Aubrey was working with his stepfather's male sex toy company Fleshlight. Describing their first encounter, Aubrey says, we set up a podcast advertising deal with him when I went out to lunch. What was supposed to be a 30-minute meeting turned into a 4-hour discussion. They touched on supervolcanoes, psychedelics, and all the mutual interests we share. The meeting was a successful one because Fleshlight eventually became the first paid sponsor of Joe's podcast. In 2011, when Aubrey approached Joe to discuss the possibility of entering the competitive supplements industry, Joe suggested that he created a cognitive enhancer brand. Aubrey bought the idea and the duo partnered to launch Onnit. Joe used his large online audience to promote the company, and Onnit has done more than $28 million in gross annual sales. Now, talking about the Joe Rogan Experience, the podcast serves as the primary source of Joe's income. Although there are little to no details on how much he earns from his show, some estimate that he makes up to $100,000 for every episode of the podcast. As earlier stated, the show was launched in 2009 by Joe and another comedian named Brian Redban. What was launched as a weekly online current events talk show has evolved into an almost daily show with massive followership and distribution on iTunes and YouTube. Some reports claim that the show receives more than 300 million downloads and streams every month and generated $30 million in 2019. The show has had appearances from influential guests like retired pro boxer Mike Tyson, serial entrepreneur Gary Vaynerchuk, Tesla's founder Elon Musk, the best-selling author of The 4-Hour Workweek Tim Ferriss, and of course, controversial conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. Until its recent exclusive acquisition by Spotify, the show consistently ranked at the top of Apple's top 100 podcasts. Devin Gordon wrote for The Atlantic, describing Joe as particularly appealing to many American men. According to him, Joe, a tireless optimist, a grab life by the throat and bite out its esophagus kind of guy, and many men respond to that. I respond to that. The competitive energy, the drive to succeed, the search for purpose, for self-respect. Get better every day. Master your domain. In May 2020, Joe's podcast was acquired by Spotify. The company announced that, following the acquisition, the talk show would become available on its platform, starting from September 1st. Spotify did not disclose the financial details of the agreement to license the podcast. However, the Wall Street Journal, citing an anonymous source, reported that it could be worth more than $100 million considering the podcast performance metrics and other factors. Don't forget that the show is downloaded almost 200 million times per month. There are individuals who feel that Joe is a sellout though. However, on the side of Spotify, this may mean that the company is out for mass acquisition and is ready to expand beyond only audio content. Joe Rogan's rise to fame and wealth is really an interesting story. The lesson here is to follow your passion and stay consistent. Apart from this, these are the two other very important lessons I was able to pick up from the success story of Joe. 1. Attention pays. You must have heard me say this a couple of times. Joe is a solid proof that attention pays, and money inevitably goes where the attention goes. Gary Vee put it succinctly when he said that attention always eventually gets monetized. Whoever has attention has leverage. Funny enough, Gary Vee has predicted in an interview last year that Joe would inevitably put his podcast on a platform for $100 million. Word for word. Why do you think brands spend millions to make popular athletes their ambassadors? Why do you think being a social media influencer is so lucrative these days? It all boils down to the attention. The Joe Rogan Experience has this. On YouTube, Joe has over 8 million subscribers and on Instagram, 9.5 million followers. In today's digital age, attention is a precious commodity. But then you must realize that this never happens overnight. You must stay consistent with what you do. From 2009 to date, that's almost 11 years of staying consistent. Build patiently, the money will come. 2. Create quality content consistently. One article or video will not shoot you to limelight. Similarly, regularly dishing out crap will not make you any money. You have to consistently deliver an amazing experience to your audience. Just so you know, the Joe Rogan Experience has over 1,400 episodes, and this is just counting the official ones. Joe routinely invites martial artists over to watch and discuss the latest fights in his Fight Companions and MMA shows podcasts. Come rain or shine, the dude is filming and producing. In a week, Joe can sometimes release up to 3 episodes of his podcast, and he kept this up for almost a decade. Talk about insane commitment. According to Gary Vee, top content creators all display these three traits: speed, volume, and quality. So instead of bothering so much on quality, start and grow along the way. Joe's first few episodes are nothing compared to what he has now. He had improved drastically, but he was consistent through it all. So there you have it. This was how Joe Rogan built his net worth of $100 million. Have you learned a thing or two? Let us know in the comments section below. And don't forget to smash the like button and hit the notification bell if you enjoyed the video.